Welcome everyone to another episode of The Followers, and looking on my screen here because Murph has made sure that it's written in front of us because myself and Shane are so useless. We're on episode 51 with Dr. Donnla O'Hagan, and on today's episode we were speaking with her about sleep. Donnla has research or PhD research and has more research looking into looking into sleep, the impacts sleep can have on us in general. So Murph, what did you kind of get from today's episode? I got a lot of confirmation bias to start off, I suppose. But
yes, her main research areas was she looked at the impact that sleep deprivation has on the performance of pilots. She was due to do another study then over in the US Naval Service, looking at waking people up in the middle of the night. What impact does that have on performance? But then she just dug into a general overview of what is sleep, what are the phases of sleep, how much do we need, how does it vary between different people, and what are all of the various impacts that external stuff like caffeine, alcohol, all like that they have on sleep, and just how we can go about setting up a decent bedtime routine so we are maximising that 1/3 of our day that is spent in bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one third of our life that we spend in bed. So it's I suppose one of the things that I think is brilliant about today's episode is that there's a lot there for everyone, whether you are an athlete, a coach, whether you've no involvement in sport or in any way, shape or form. This is much more of a health focused kind of episode for me anyway. So yeah, there was a lot there. There's a lot of very practical takeaways, which is incredibly important. One thing before we kind of jump into the episode, we did have a little bit of a kind of an issue with Donnla's mic at one point, but it wasn't for too long, so hopefully that shouldn't be too much of an issue.
Lovely. Hope you all enjoy. Donnla, it's a bit of a strange world to get into. Like, you grow up thinking, I love sport, I might get into a bit more into sport, or I love sport and I like the psychology side, I might go more in there. I love music, I'll try and do something in music. But did you grow up loving sleep? Like, you were there for 14 hours a day saying, I sleep way more than everyone else and I want to find out why. And is that what put you on the route? Or was it a little bit more normal than that you got in?
Well, firstly, yes, I do love sleep. I absolutely hate getting out of my bed in the mornings. No, it was like a really kind of interesting route that I kind of took to it. So I did sports science in DCU, and as part of my final year project, so those main projects you do at the end of your degree, I looked at the impact of sleep on ultra endurance cyclists. So I wanted to see how it was going to affect them physiologically, but also cognitively, because I was always kind of interested in the cognitive and psychological side of things. And, this project was the only one that was kind of looking in that area at the time, and it just happened to be in sleep. So I kind of got into it like that. And then I went off and I did a master's in sports psychology, but an opportunity came up back in DCU then to do research into sleep in commercial airline pilots. So it was identified. So because I'd had that background of sleep in sports performance, I had kind of a background in the area. So it wasn't a big hop over. It was kind of like, this opportunity has come up to look at more research in this area. So I kind of hopped on that. And then from there, I've somehow ended up all in this sleep world. So that's how I ended up in it.
So researching in pilots, like, that was largely based on their cognitive performance, around their decision making, everything like that. Can you just give us a general overview? Like, my thoughts here around sleeper is Leonardo DiCaprio on Catch Me If You Can, that he's working long hours but then spends half the night out partying, and that's what impacting it. Like, do you have to dig into schedules and stuff around it, or how, like, even flight patterns or their blocks of work are put together? Is that all factored in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of found that there were issues with sleep among commercial airline pilots. And so obviously it's split into long haul and short haul. But actually people always think, it's the long haul pilots, they're flying for X number of hours and it's really hard and long in them. But really what we found was that it was the short haul pilots that were really being affected by sleep, because it was very long hour days. Your turnover could be your amount of sleep time when you add in travel and commuting as well. They were actually having very limited opportunities for sleep. And as a consequence, situations where pilots may be going into work and they're actually very sleep deprived. And of course, when you're trying to fly a huge aircraft with potentially 300 people on board, and you need to make sure that every decision that you make is right, there is no room for error. It puts you in a situation where you need to make sure that that's right, and you have to eliminate that human error. But if we actually have the pilots working 18, 19, 20-hour days, a very short opportunity for sleep and straight back in the next day. They're not superhuman people, like they're pilots, like they're just like me and you, and they need sleep just like me and you. So, it was there was a lot of interest kind of growing in this area at the time. And when we were looking at scheduling, and we were looking at other factors that were kind of impacting the pilots. But the main thing that I really wanted to look at, or the route that I wanted to look at, was, well, what are the actual effects of loss of sleep on pilots when they're in the cockpit? So can we actually begin to identify, well, when reaction time starts to go, or when decision making starts to decrease, or when their communication starts to become unclear, is this the kind of trigger that, actually we need to make an intervention here, because this could lead to a serious reduction in performance, which we can't afford to happen.
So when the greatest risks actually start to go up, you're not pinpointing the exact time, but there's probably a window of, once I've been deprived for this many hours, the chances of something bad happening go up by quite a bit, because you're coupling a few things together.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Because obviously, the longer they spend on it, like fatigue and tiredness obviously naturally builds up. But it's not just a case of, when they start work, it naturally builds up. Like, they could already be awake for a couple of hours before that. So, people think, oh, well, I work an 8-hour shift, that's fine. But if you've been up 3 hours beforehand, you're actually on your 11th, 12th, 13th hour of wakefulness. And as we know, as humans, fatigue and tiredness will begin to filter in there. So we kind of, we need to be aware and ready of that. But also, you're assuming that you start on perfect 100% every morning. You get a full night's sleep and you start on 100% the next morning. But no one works like that. Well, people may work like that, but a lot of people don't, and they're carrying over sleep debt. So if you've only had 4 hours sleep the night before, you're not starting on 100% the next morning. So you're already in a deprived situation, and you're only adding these longer work hours in on top. So it's only getting worse and worse.
So what did your studies consist of then, or how did you break it apart to test that? I assume you're not putting them on actual flights to see what happened.
No, couldn't get ethical clearance for that for some reason. Don't know why. So we were actually really lucky, because we ended up linking with the National Aerospace Lab in Amsterdam. And over there, they have fixed simulators, and they have lots of different programs and computer-based flight simulators that could work as well. So they actually came in and set up a computer-based flight simulator, which we have in DCU. So what I did was, I got pilots in, so they would, typically the pilots I was working with were short haul. So they would work their normal 5-day week, and then I would get them on their last day. So they'd have worked that morning, and then I get them in and I would test them. I keep them awake for a 24-hour period, and I would test them every 23 hours. So, every 3 hours across a 24-hour period. So I would look at like their reaction time, their decision-making, their risk-taking, but I also looked at their flying performance. And it was actually really interesting because, of course, we expected these decreases in performance to happen. But what we found was that pilots who had the least number of flying hours, so you can't necessarily say younger pilots because people will come to it at all different ages, but people who were most recently became pilots, their flying performance actually got better as the time awake extended. Whereas those who had more flying hours experience, their performance actually got worse. And we couldn't really understand why this had happened. But when we were testing them, we were getting them to manually fly. So oftentimes, like when they're in the air, a lot of things are done automatically. But because we were getting them to manually fly, those who were came out most recently, so those who had got their flying license most recently, in order to get your license, you need to clock up a number of flying hours, and oftentimes pilots need to do that manually because it can be expensive. So what we determined was those who had qualified most recently maybe had those skills more at the forefront of their mind. So when they got really tired and everything began to kind of decrease, they became much more alert because they were so conscious and aware to be on. Whereas pilots who had, maybe hadn't manually flown in a long time, they were getting more and more tired and were getting more and more lax, and actually their performance was getting worse and worse. So it's really interesting. We didn't expect that to happen.
And would there have been much of a difference in, say, the age profiles there of those kind of two groups you just mentioned with new pilots versus, or would they be kind of mixed?
No, and that's why I said it's important that we say those who are most recently qualified, because people may come to it at different times. So it wasn't an age thing, but also we had our age range of participants limited, and it was all within the same pool. Because if you go older, there's different effects of sleep, and people can sleep differently as they get older. So we wanted to keep our group as homogenous as possible. So no, it wasn't actually. We didn't determine that it was an age factor that was causing it.
Is it possibly as well, because we'd Alan Dunton on a few weeks ago and he was talking about skill acquisition like that, and I'm just thinking, is it because when you're in the earlier stages of your flying career, you're just a little bit more likely to be switched on and be a little bit more deliberate about what you're doing, whereas when you've done it for longer and longer and longer, you're just a little bit more switched off?
Yeah, maybe, like, absolutely. And that's the thing as well, when people get tired and they're driving home, and you've been doing it for a long time, and you're not really switched on. I know what I'm doing, and you're kind of on automatic, and then that's when you start to see the accidents happening, or the sudden breaks, or you kind of give yourself a fright. So it's when you kind of go into that automatic. But it is. We don't know the answers, but it could be a case of they were just maybe that little more switched on, a little bit more conscious of what was going on because they were newer.
Was there much individual variation? Like after 6 hours being kept awake, some people were, but some people at 24 were absolutely fine. Or what was it like that? What was the range like?
Yeah, there was some variation. Now unfortunately, we had a very small, limited number of females within our study, and we would need a lot more to determine anything from the data. But just looking at the raw data, when we looked at risk-taking behavior, and as I said, we had very limited number of females in our study, so we can't actually determine anything from this. But risk-taking behavior for males increased, but actually the females became more conservative in their behaviors. So now whether that was just chance of that data, but it would be really interesting to look more at that and see, is there a difference there? But that was probably the biggest thing that stuck out, where, kind of things went in opposite directions.
And generally then, was there kind of a time where, listen, once you go past this many hours of being awake, you just can't fly? Like, was there one kind of main recommendation that way, or even kind of key points to say, once they've been awake for 18 hours, it's just not safe to be letting them in there, or can you even be as definitive as that? It
would be great to be that definitive, because then you could, across all disciplines and industries, you could say, look, we need to know that your workers have had that many hours work, and it would be great in society if we could get to that. But I don't know if we'll ever be able to do that, because it's so inter-individual how people react, the sleep debt that people are carrying in, things that people have going on in their other lives. You can have things going on that can make you, very tired for a particular week, and you could be fine the next week. So because there's so many factors at play, we can't say, no, this is, the end line. Because, if you look at in the medical industry, it would be brilliant to be able to say that, no one wants a surgeon coming in to work on them if he's been awake for 25 hours. But, circumstance or, whatever it may be, may cause that to happen.
Yeah, actually, and the only kind of extension that would be like, were there any kind of recommendations, I suppose, for pilots specifically around scheduling of a work week? Like you mentioned, you get pilots in on kind of day 5 of your work week, but I guess for me, when I would look at, say, pilots, I wouldn't look at them like your normal 9 to 5 job Monday to Friday. But were there any kind of takeaways that you had from that, where it's some kind of safe range, like you should or shouldn't have people work 5 days in a row or anything like that?
Like, from our research, we couldn't make those suggestions, and I couldn't even attempt to do that, because I was really looking at one small part. Like, I wanted to see what was happening to these individuals when they were hitting those periods of time. So really, like, there's so much more research that needs to be done in this area, where we look at longitudinal, like we look at it across a period of days. And, that type of research is brilliant, but it can, it requires a lot of resources and a lot of time to be able to set something like that up. So, I wouldn't want to comment on that and say it is either way, because I couldn't determine that from the research that we kind of conducted.
And from there, you went looking at doing a bit. Obviously, COVID didn't fully allow it, but doing some work. Was the Naval Service, US Naval Service?
Yeah.
And that was looking slightly different. It wasn't just sleep deprivation, but it was actually the stage of sleep.
Yeah, so that was in the PhD, and then after that I went across and worked with the US Navy. So I did a postdoc with them. So I was based in NPS, which is the Naval Postgraduate School. So it's like a postgraduate school and a naval base in a place called Monterey in California. And the big thing that I was looking at there was this thing called sleep inertia. So sleep inertia is, do you ever wake up from sleep and you're extremely disorientated? You've no idea what's going on. You couldn't do anything if you're asked because you're just so confused. That's called sleep inertia, where there's that extreme confusion. And this is a really important thing that we need to look at for individuals on call. So, for example, in the Navy, for the men and women on the out on the ships or out on the warships, if they wake up in an emergency situation, you need to get up, you need to, undertake your tasks, you need to make decisions, you need to be able to react immediately. But if you wake up it's after a period of deep sleep, you wake up with sleep inertia, it's associated with this disorientation and this confusion. And it can last anything from 15 minutes to 60 minutes. So it's kind of this weird window, but really those first 15 minutes seem to be the problem. Now, you're trying to wake people who are extremely disorientated and they need to immediately go from 0 to 100 and make, life determining decisions, but their decision making is all over the place. So what the big thing that I was looking at was, how can we get people from 0 to 100 as quickly as possible in these emergency situations? So it would also apply to the likes of nurses in hospitals if they're sleeping on call, or even doctors who sleep on call. So the big thing, they're looking at different things that they can use basically to get you from 0 to 100 as quickly as possible. And the two things that I was looking at were scent and exposure to bright light. So we had our whole study designed, ready to go, and then COVID hit, and then we couldn't do it. So, but there is more research ongoing in the area, but I think it'll be able to have huge benefit, when they get a better understanding of it, of helping individuals in these emergency situations to kind of remove that error that does creep in, because you can't make appropriate, correct decisions when you're completely disorientated like that. So, it's to help those different scenarios and situations where that occurs.
What kind of scents were you going to look at?
So actually, we had this scent that was specifically designed for us. And now the only way that I can explain it, whenever I smelled it, it smelled like Christmas. So it was really like piney, kind of, it was like minty. It was a combination of different products. And, from a distance, it's lovely and smells like Christmas. Up close, it would nearly burn your nostrils. But so we would expose them to this. So we would awaken them because sleep inertia is most dangerous when you awaken from deep sleep. So it's one of the stages of sleep. And when you awaken from that, that's when you really experience it. So we were going to expose this to participants when they woke from deep sleep and see if this had an impact then on their reaction, on their decision making, on their mood and on their attention.
I wonder will Lynx bring out a new brand in a year's time if it does work called Lynx Navy
salts.
Wake Up.
Said here first.
We'll have it, yeah, a record of that. And you could see that having a lot of knock-on impacts, like you said, nurses on call, but even, people working as firefighters and stuff like that, who may be woken up by little things and, you have to go do something, really high-end, ridiculously important, and make a lot of decisions here. Something to have me as alert and awake for that would be a big help.
Yeah, definitely, because, if we know if someone's working at a certain time, that's fine. We can program the amount of sleep that we have, and we can program when we wake up. But if you've got these people who are on who can be woken at any stage of the night, you can't plan for that. So, you need to have something in place that kind of protects against that. Again, the potential of human error coming in when these emergency situations and decisions, need to be made.
And that's looking at, fairly fine detail, the impact of sleep on like high-end performance in various ways. We'll take it back a couple of steps now and just look at, first of all, what actually is sleep? Like what's happening there? And then what are a couple of the stages, why we need them all, and what's going on in each one?
Yeah, so we still don't really know the purpose of sleep. it's one of the main kind of physiologic processes we still don't know the answer to. We still don't know what happens, really, but we know we need it. We can't survive without it. So the way sleep works is we go through different sleep cycles. So a cycle is, anything from 90 to 120 minutes. And what happens through the night is we tend to have about 4 or 5 cycles, depending on how long you sleep for. And as I said, they're about 90 to 120 minutes. So they tend to be a little bit shorter earlier in the night, and they get longer later on in the night. But within each cycle, so each sleep cycle, there are 4 different stages. So there used to be 5, but now there's 4. So in stage 1, so this is like our real light sleep. So that's when you are just kind of nodding off. When you twitch kind of, if you're asleep and you might twitch and wake yourself up. So that kind of happens in stage 1 as you're just kind of nodding off. Now, if you're not disturbed, there's no big loud noises or anything like that, then you just progress on into stage 2. And in stage 2, so your breathing, it continues to decrease. Your heart rate continues to decrease, your brain activity slows down. So everything just slows down a little bit more and more again. Then you enter into stage 3. So this is known as deep sleep. So when you enter into stage 3, this is what we were talking about with the sleep inertia. When you're awoken from stage 3, that's when you experience the sleep inertia. So when you're awoken from that deep stage sleep. Because if you're awoken with the earlier, lighter stages of sleep, it doesn't really have that confusion impact. But during this stage, so this is where a lot of your recovery will take place when you're in stage 3. And it's also found to be very associated with immune function as well. So, if you're sick or you want to protect against sickness, you want to make sure that you're getting enough of this sleep. Then after stage 3, you progress into stage 4. And this is known as REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. So earlier in the night, in those earlier cycles, it might only be 10 minutes. It can be quite short. But as you get later into the night, you get more and more time in your REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is really important for learning and consolidating memories and creativity. So, if you're at a time where, you're trying to study for exams, or even you're doing exams, actually the best thing you need to do is give yourself a really big night's sleep, because everything you've learned that day, the more time that you get in that REM sleep will help consolidate all those memories and, will help your learning. So, do you remember what's been told before exams? You make sure you get a good sleep, and you're like, no, that's not sleep I need. I need to cram everything in. But actually, the best thing you could do is go to sleep. So they are your 4 different stages that you progress through. And, sometimes we hear like, oh, well, I can get away with shorter amounts of sleep, or I can get away with 4 or 5 hours sleep. But actually, if all your benefits are coming, or, your big learning benefits, for example, are coming in stage 4 or in REM sleep, you need to make sure that you're getting into it. But you don't just jump from 1 to 4 or 1 to 3. You progress through each of the stages. So if you fall asleep, you naturally cycle through all the stages. But if you wake up, you go back to the start again. So that's why there's a lot of attention going, well, it's not just about the length of time you sleep you get, but it's not about sleep quantity only, but also your quality sleep. Because if you keep waking up, going back to stage 1, stage 2, before you get into all the benefits of the recovery. So you want to make sure that it's as long as you can get it unbroken.
And how long roughly, is there any kind of known time frame for each one of the stages? Like, is the deep sleep there, the third level, is that a particularly long section of that 90 to 120 minutes, or how long do they last?
So they do change as you progress through each of the stages. So they'll be slightly different, but also it's so individual, the amount of time and the different factors that can influence how quickly you move into one to the other. Like if you're deprived of sleep, or you've had a loss of sleep, you might move into stage 3 a lot quicker than versus if you're having nice consistent sleep every night, you might have set pattern. But you tend to, stage 1 and stage 2 tend to be quite short. Stage 3 will be a bit longer, and then stage 4, or your REM sleep, will get progressively longer and longer as you go through each of the cycles. So it's very hard. People always say, at what time point do I go in there? And it's like so inter-individual and so many factors impact it. But it's, the main thing is REM gets longer as you progress through. But also your dreaming happens in REM sleep. And that's why when people wake up in the early morning, because a lot of that REM sleep happens in the early morning. That's why a lot of people remember their dreams, because it just happens so so close to their awakening, versus if you don't remember anything, then you may have woken up out of a different stage of sleep.
Okay.
But the main thing,
yeah. No, go on.
The main thing you want to avoid is do not wake up in stage 3 sleep, or your deep sleep. Now, obviously, if you wake up, you wake up, but you want to, if you're trying to time your sleep or work out what time, you want to ensure you're avoiding stage 3, because with stage 3, you can have that grogginess for an hour that kind of hangs over you. So you want to, try and schedule it. It'd be lovely if you could just pinpoint, right, I finished stage 4 sleep at this time. Now I'm going to make sure that my alarm is set for that time. But, we need to be very in tune and with our bodies to work that out, even if we could.
That's what I was going to ask, was our morning alarms are such an integral part of our lives. Working out when to set that for, so that you don't wake up in that. I suppose it really is kind of, it takes time. I'm guessing just from you answered before I got to ask, so that was great. But it is a huge thing for people that some mornings they wake you. I suppose everyone listening and stuff will anecdotally know, like, yeah, some days I wake up, bang, I feel great. More days I wake up and the coffee first thing it does nothing. It's but yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I suppose I know we'll probably touch on aids in a while, like sleep aids and stuff like that, but I suppose with the technology that's coming out, or that is out at the moment and is constantly improving, with our fitness watches and those wearables and that, have you much experience with like how accurate they are at kind of noticing the different changes in sleep patterns, or the sleep, the point you're at in your sleep cycle, or are they a bit like calories, which tend to be, well off?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Personally, myself, I don't use them, but that's just me. So PSG, polysomnography, is considered the gold standard of measuring sleep, and that's where, those images where you see they have like the headgear on, and you sleep and there's all the wires coming out of it, and that will measure everything, and that can indicate your brain waves and what stage of sleep. You read it, and then you can determine what stage of sleep you're in from that. So that's the gold standard. Now, all these different, like for example, watches are probably the most familiar or popular at the minute. They all do a job. Would I say that it's, the complete correct answer and that they're giving you the exact right information? I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't imagine so, but that's not to say they wouldn't be a benefit. I mean, they can be helpful, but there's that idea of, people getting a bit obsessed, like, you can get obsessed now. I need to count the steps. Oh, because I didn't get this many steps, I don't feel good. And okay, well, I only got 6.5 hours sleep according to my watch last night. Okay, well, then I must be tired today. And, it's nearly like people live by what they think they found and, what these apps are telling them. But, just my opinion, I think if you know your body and you take time to listen to your body and you take time to, get your routines in place, that you will be able to work all those things out. Like, you will be able to identify what works for you, when going to sleep works for you, when waking up works for you. But, using those aids is beneficial, but within reason. And, as I said, there are useful ones out there, but I would be wary of the information that I would take from it. I wouldn't take it as it's not gold standard. And I'm sure there'll be huge development because there's such an interest growing in sleep. I'm sure there'll be a lot more interest going forward, and there'll be a lot more investment in products. And that's not to say they won't improve and get better all the time. I've no doubt that they will. But just at the minute, from a, wrist actigraphy, gives you information, but just take it all with caution.
And even there, in terms of like you mentioned, 6.5 hours of sleep, I must be tired. Obviously, we're aiming for more than that. So you would hear the 8 hours, the 7 to 9. Like, is it actually, because the individual differences, is there actually quite a decent range there, or are they just saying it to try and give people something to aim for and then hopefully build on?
Yeah, everyone wants the golden number. That's all everyone wants to know. What's the exact number that I need to hit of sleep? That's it. That's what I'm going to go for. And no one can say that because, we know our window. We're aiming for more than 7 hours sleep. We know that gives us sufficient time to cycle through each of our, to go through each of our stages of sleep and to go through each of our sleep cycles, in order to get all those benefits. But there's huge inter-individual differences. we were chatting earlier, we were saying about Margaret Thatcher, how, it was the brag to say, oh, well, I can get by on 4 hours sleep. And, Churchill said the same thing, I can get by on 4 hours sleep. Except as I was saying to you guys, I read that no one knew he was actually napping in the afternoon. So he was catching up on sleep there. But, we have this society where we brag about, the lack of sleep and how I can get by on such little amount of sleep. And, it's like a brag, but it's a physiological need. It shouldn't be a brag. And in fact, actually, humans were the only animals who actually opt to achieve less sleep than we biologically need. And we're meant to be one of the most important species. And yet, we see it as a pride thing to get by with less sleep. But that's also influenced by the society that we've created. But, we have this 24-hour lifestyle that we have made. And unfortunately, one of the things that's negatively impacted by that is our sleep. But back kind of to the main point of what you're saying, there is that window. Some people will need more. Some people can get by on less. You also have different situations where you hear people say, oh, well, I can get by in 7 hours, or I can get by in 6.5 hours. And, I'm doing absolutely fine. I don't need any more. But the issue is, if you're getting by in 6.5 hours sleep, you may only be working at 80% of your capacity. So if you actually increase that by an hour and increase that to 7.5 hours sleep, you might actually increase your capacity to 90% and be suddenly a lot more efficient in your day and have a lot more energy. So, people who say that, well, I have no issues at all. And some people won't. 6.5 will be plenty for some people, but, it's a very small percentage of people that can get by with those much lesser hours of sleep. And actually, just by making that small tweak and giving ourselves an additional 45 minutes of sleep or an additional 60 minutes of sleep can have massive impacts. But until we do it and see the benefits and effects, you're not going to get those benefits, or you're not going to gain those benefits associated with that longer sleep until you actually try and do it and see how it affects you.
I think you phrased it well there when you said they get by. They're not anywhere near functioning optimally. They're just getting by.
But that belief that they're this is me oh, well, I always feel tired in the afternoons. But should you be? Actually, if you got that bit more sleep, would you be tired in the afternoons? Actually, maybe you don't need to live with that tiredness every day. Maybe by getting those extra bits of sleep or getting that extra sleep, you wouldn't have that, and you could suddenly be a lot more efficient or be a lot more enjoyable to be around or have a lot more positive outlook on things.
If you apply to like other examples there, oh, I'm fine, I get by with only one glass of water a day. Like, I always feel thirsty. I keep getting cramp and my brain function has gone terrible, but I'm getting by.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
And with the range there, now we've spoken about, obviously, so we're talking, somewhere 7 to 9 hours. We've no idea what you should be in there. It's individual, but does that sleep, as we touched on just before we got going, does that sleep need to be a continuous stretch, or is Murph? You mentioned someone there at the outset. Is it possible to have 5 separate 90-minute kind of sleeping opportunities throughout the day? Now, that's obviously not practical for most people, but do come across people who might take maybe a nap during the day, or might have a shorter night's sleep and then fit in 1 or 2 shorter periods of sleep at other points in their day. Is that is that less optimal, even though maybe across a 24-hour period you still get the overall, or what do we know about that?
Yeah, so it's like I was saying, it's not just about sleep quantity, so how long you sleep for. It's also about your sleep quality as well. But, if you think about it, when we go through our different stages, so as I said, we have our 4 different stages of sleep, and that makes up one sleep cycle. But, you go through each of your sleep cycles, but we get all the benefits. Like, for example, our immune function, our recovery all happens in stage 3. And, we have our memory consolidation and our learning all happening in stage 4. And it isn't until you hit that 4th cycle that you start getting all that, long period of time in REM sleep. So that rapid eye movement sleep, so stage 4. But you need to get through all the cycles before you get to that. So if you need to get all those benefits there, and they're happening after 6-7 hours of continuous sleep, living off 90 minutes only, gives you enough to get through that first cycle. So you're only getting 1 sleep cycle, but you're not getting all that duration of time in REM sleep where you're getting all those huge benefits. You're not getting that longer period of time in deep sleep where you're getting all that recovery. So you need to have a long period of uninterrupted sleep in order to generate and get all those benefits. Whereas, trying to live off 2-hour blocks, you're not benefiting. You're not getting that full recovery. You're not going to be recovering. You're not going to have that promotion of learning and creativity that you would if you had that long, uninterrupted sleep. And again, if you're getting sufficient periods of sleep at night, then you don't need to spend time napping during the day because you've got your sufficient sleep at night. So, sometimes people look at it going, oh, well, I'll save a bit of time. But, if you're still doing, 5 90 minutes, it's the same as getting a full night's sleep. So why not get it when everyone else is asleep as well? Why not make the benefit of it rather than thinking, oh, this is great, I'm awake during the night when everyone else is asleep.
It was Nick Littlehales that suggested that. Now, to be fair, I think he works with, say, high-end business people who may be working off a couple of different time zones. They might have a meeting with someone in Japan at 4 o'clock in the morning, then a meeting with someone in California at 10 o'clock at night, so they do have to mix and match. Plus, I think he has done a little bit with maybe athletes who are flying across time zones, like NBA, NFL, they cross maybe 5 time zones there. So you may have to alter stuff, but I think the baseline should be the key, that that 7 to 9 hour window, and then adapt where you have to, as opposed to trying to find this other way around it. So we're looking at that 7 to 9 hour window. That's largely in adults, adolescents and children, because we have a good few coaches, the younger people here. They generally tend to need that little bit more. And even like after that, the time they go to bed at and get up, it may not be the exact same as adults, but we don't change school times.
Yeah, so in their teenage years they may need a little bit more. You may kind of want to hit more 8 to 9, and then up into adulthood, you can, the aim is greater than 7, but of course, as we said, all with inter-individual differences. But also, if you've got a lot of athletes on the call and you're training hard, you need to get more sleep. So an athlete needs to get more sleep than, let's say, the average person in the population, because you need to have a lot more recovery on your body. Now, you may think, right, I'm training hard, I'm eating right, I'm hydrating right. If you're not getting the right sleep, you are not going to recover. It's one of the most important things, that go with it. You can't have one without the other, and all of those factors influence each other. But yeah, so if you're coming into a period of particularly high training, then you need to put alterations in your schedule so that you can get those extra hours sleep, because it'll only promote it. There's no point in doing all the hard work at the pitch and, training like mad, and then you're actually undoing it all because you're not giving yourself sufficient recovery after. And then what's interesting then, you were saying about the teenagers. So we all have these circadian rhythms. So naturally for us, it's we sleep at night and we're awake during the day. Obviously, now people do shift work and there's different things on, but naturally that is what our body is in line to, the rotation of the earth. And that's what we do at night. When the sun goes down, we sleep. When it comes up, we're awake during the day. But teenagers actually have a slight shift in their circadian rhythm. So actually it's a lot more natural for a teenager to stay up later at night and sleep in later in the morning. Now, of course, they get awful stick for this, or being up late at night, not getting up the next morning. But there's much more research done going, we actually need to stop being so hard on them. And actually, do we need to move back school times? Because it's natural for a teenager. That's the way their cycle is actually, in training them to stay awake later and sleep in later. But it's not a case that they're being lazy. It's that's what their body is naturally aligning them to. So, take that into consideration with any younger athletes, that actually may be the case, instead of maybe don't be giving them too much stick for staying up a bit later and sleeping in a bit later.
I hope all John's students are listening to this.
I'd say parents love hearing you saying that. Just thinking back to Paul Talty, who was on a couple of weeks ago there. He works at Swim Ireland, and there's a few very strong swimmers in our school. So they're training at 6 o'clock, and they say in the summer their performance just goes up so much because they have that extra opportunity to nap during the day and end up getting around like 10 hours of sleep a day as opposed to 8, to, I suppose, complement the high training load they have. I was heard, I think it was Sherry Matt, she was a researcher in either Stanford or Berkeley. I assume all you sleep experts have like a WhatsApp group that you chat on.
Oh yeah.
But she started doing a study on sleep, and it was largely around like cognitive performance. And she just at the end of it said to two of the girls who were on, saying like, any other differences that you noticed? Yeah, actually, we're here on swim scholarships, and we got really good over this study just because they were sleeping extra to like benefit cognitive stuff, but it had a massive impact on their swim times. Their swim times came way down. They started way better in competitions, and like, this has been good few years ago, but that's where she then went on more of a journey to look at sleep and athletic performance and the benefit it has, and just how like you do all this hard training, but you soak up all the training so much better when you're, you know, sleeping more.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's just as important as your hydration. It's just as important as your physical recovery you do. It's just as important as what food you're putting into your body. And it's not that one is better than the other or more important than the other. If you're not working them all and using them all to your benefit, then you are not going to be at 100%. There is no point in thinking you will. Like, and it's not 100% of the world, it's 100% of what you're capable of. And if you don't take all these different factors into consideration and how they impact and influence your performance, then you're not going to be at 100%. So I don't know if you've seen before, this is easier to see in an image where you have sporting performance on top and you have your 5 pillars underneath. You have your physical, technical, tactical, lifestyle and mental, and you have your 5 different pillars. And you ask your athletes, well, how long do you spend on the physical side of your performance? And usually they say a lot of hours. And what about the tactical side? They spend a lot of time on tactics and technical, and then the mental. And what about lifestyle? Oh, well, how does that add in? But that's a whole pillar for your sporting performance. So if you're not working on that, then if you consider that each pillar is worth 20%, and the 5 make up 100%, and the sporting performance is 100%. If you're not working on your lifestyle component, of which sleep is a massive part, then you're only ever going to get to 80% if everything else is perfect. So you have a whole 20% that you haven't even tapped into. So anyone maybe who is listening, who isn't doing anything on sleep at the minute, and they're just getting by, well, think of different tweaks that you could put in place now that actually could give you that 1%, 2%, 5% better in your performance than you're getting right now. Why not try it? Because not only will it benefit your sporting performance, it'll benefit your physical health, your mental health, and your well-being. So it's benefits across the board.
Yeah, I feel there's a lot of similarities in sleep that we would experience as nutritionists, kind of along that same thing, where there's realistically only 3-4 hours you can at a top level put into your physical work every day, but it's that rest of it again, that like the rest of your day is spent prioritizing your eating and your drinking, and then obviously your 8 to 9 hours of sleep as well are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great because there's a lot more of a mindset to that now. There was a lot more, now we need to train 10 hours a day and this is the way to do it. But it's, all the advances, there's great recognition of all these different factors that come into play.
I remember a few years ago, Stephen Hunt, former Republic of Ireland international, drew a little bit of ire from the GAA community, claiming that GAA athletes wouldn't be capable of, I'm paraphrasing, but wouldn't be capable of, professionalism because of the amount of time that has to go into recovery and that. And obviously, being a professional footballer, you're given a certain amount of hours throughout your day there to catch up on sleep and recovery and stuff like that, as well as having a good night's sleep. But if we take, say, we'd have coaches, athletes and stuff who might play at the top level in GAA, hurling, football, camogie, listening, that often I will come across teams train and have meetings that go on, like you mentioned. So you have the physical, then you have the tactical, and then they're trying to squeeze in like their diet. All of a sudden there's people getting home at 11. By the time they're in bed, it could be 12 if going well, and they're up for work 6:30, 7 in the morning. And no matter how much they want to actually put into their sleep, they're really being cut off on 2 ends. Is there anything that those type of athletes can do? Because as I mentioned, even like there's club athletes as well who might have to drive. If I take myself for example, I have an hour and 15 minutes of a drive to training. So if we finish training at 9, have a meeting, it could be 9:30, 9:45, then I have an hour and 15 minutes to come home and eat and the whole lot in that time. Is there anything that can be done there to try and mitigate the impacts of maybe a shortened sleep window there for people who are just not given the opportunity?
Donnla's not going to ring your manager and tell him you don't have to go train, all right?
Yeah, what's his number? Yeah, I mean, look, obviously it depends on the sport. And, like if you're, let's say, an individual athlete and you have team meetings after, can you go, okay, can we do this before? Or can we schedule this in another time? Or can we, approach your coach and be like, how can we work? How can we make this better? But, if it's a large team and these are the only times that you can kind of get at it, and you are going to, on those nights you're training, you are going to get that limited sleep opportunity. Be aware of that, but then counteract it in the sleep. So, if you do miss a bit of sleep, if you miss an hour of sleep, let's say, for example, you can catch up the next night. Now, your recovery sleep, it isn't as good as the main sleep you get, but if your situation warrants that to happen and there's nothing you can do, then, you need to accept and be aware this happens on Wednesday nights where I get a limited sleep opportunity. Okay, I need to ensure I schedule an extra sleep period on the Thursday night to help catch up. But, there's been research done and it said that it can take up to 4 days to catch up on 1 hour of lost sleep. So it's not just a case of I lost a half an hour sleep the night before, I'm just going to do another half an hour tonight. It doesn't work like that. It's not as good quality as when you originally get it. Now, obviously, at least you're doing something about it. You're scheduling it into your next night as best you can. And that in that instance where, things may be outside your control of how long meetings go on or, what the team schedule is, that may be the best thing that you can do. But in other circumstances, like, is it worth talking to a coach and talking about, the role that sleep could play and how this may interfere and impact sleep? I mean, a lot of coaches are very open to different factors and, so is it worth having a conversation with your coach, or is it a case that, look, this is the way it is, therefore I need to be prepared the night before and the night after to ensure that I'm catching up on what is missed there because I can't get around that.
Just to pull it back a little bit to the circadian rhythms there, you mentioned it's kind of with the circle of the sun and everything. In the wintertime, when we have shorter days, do we actually need more, or shorter daylight hours, do we need more sleep in the winter than in summer, or does that impact it as much?
Yeah, so there's been some research done to say, obviously, when the sun goes down earlier, that actually people do naturally sleep more in the winter because, so we have these things called sight gerbers, and these are like cues within our environment or within us that tell our body what time of the day it is. So, for example, like hormones are released in your body at different times, and that tells your body what time it is, or the time that you eat food indicates to your body what time of the day it is. But the most important one is light. So light comes into our retina and, sends those messages around our body to go, okay, it's bright. I need to be awake. I need to be up. And then obviously when that goes down, that, like, when darkness comes, that sends a trigger to it's called the brain's master clock, and it'll send a message to the pineal gland to release melatonin. So melatonin, I'm sure everyone's kind of heard of that before. So that's something that prepares your body for sleep. So that helps decrease your body temperature, decrease your breathing rate, and kind of preps you for sleep. So it makes sense that, when in winter, when the sun goes down earlier, we actually do sleep more. But then what's happening now is, well, we have this 24-hour society that we have developed. So, we go out for drinks, we have, bright lights off our screens, we go home and watch TV or watch our phone and it's bright lights coming in through our eyes. Of course, that's throwing everything on us. So, yes, we do. But it's not that we necessarily need more sleep then. But research has found that we do tend to sleep a bit more in the winter in the likes of Ireland where it gets darker earlier.
And just then, I've heard this, I don't know if it's true or not, but that by timing our sleep where possible to the dark hours, that if someone goes to bed at 12 and gets up at 8, if they're to move everything back an hour, so go to bed at 11 and get up at 7, which is a little bit more in tune with when it gets dark and when it gets bright, does that tend to lead to better quality of sleep, or like affect the sleep cycles a bit, or is it the key is on the overall amount and that doesn't make as much of an impact?
Yeah, so like back on, because that links with your circadian rhythm. So like, we have these natural like peaks and troughs that happen, and our lowest point in the night, which is like when your alertness is lowest and your performance will be lowest, is between 3 and 5. So yes, ideally, like getting to bed at 10 or even getting to bed at 11 and sleeping until 7 is going to be that little bit more beneficial because it's more in line with the natural circadian rhythm than, let's say, so someone could say, yeah, I go to bed at 1 o'clock and I get up at 9, so it's 8 hours sleep. But you've already, based on your circadian rhythm, the sun's already come up, so your body naturally starts to peak up again. So it is more beneficial to pull it back more in line. So yeah, getting to bed that bit earlier is more natural with our circadian rhythm, so will be more beneficial.
This is along the same kind of avenue, but say a lot of people, obviously we have a lot of coaches listening to the show, so you'd have maybe 2 or 3 days in the week we can have whatever, a 5 a.m. start or a 6 a.m. start. Are you better off kind of sticking with, say, a set bedtime as such and then sacrificing the extra 2 hours sleep to stick with your rhythm, or vice versa? Like, is there a way, should you prioritize quality over quantity, or do you have the power to do that?
Yeah, so try and keep it consistent, because that's what your body will naturally go with. And, of course, the biggest thing, now I appreciate you're talking about training during the week, but, come the weekend, people are like, I can stay in bed at 12 o'clock. Brilliant. Knocks everything. So, you want to keep that routine the same. And, then your body becomes more accustomed and aligned with it. And then it becomes more natural for you. Now, I mean, like, if you don't have to get up at 5 o'clock, you may not want to get up at 5 o'clock. You can push it back slightly, but don't, push it back to 8 or 9, because that's 3 hours outside of your natural rhythm. And then your body has to, I need to be in bed 3 hours earlier tonight. And oh no, wait, 3 hours this night. So the big thing is keeping it consistent and keeping it key. And then with that, people become a lot more in tune with their bodies and what's happening, and they can tweak things up to benefit them, because people just go, that's it. Donnla said I should go to bed at 10 o'clock and get up at 6. That's it. I'm just going to do that. And we really need you to be in those routines to actually identify what's happening with your body and what really works for you.
That's just like the same advice that I would give to someone with their diet. Like, your body doesn't care if it's Wednesday or if it's Sunday. It's, having your weekend treats. If it really throws you off, it's like, what does your body think about that? But with the circadian rhythm, like, we'll hear of things like night owls and stuff like this. Do we know about or what do we know about these, I suppose, the animal names that we give to different types of people and that, but also what are the differences between people that we're aware of? Because we do hear different, there are other names I know get banded around. I don't know much about them. Everyone's familiar with night owls, but there are a few other names that kind of pop around as well. What is there in the research with all that?
Yeah, so, people, again, it all comes back to this individual. Like, some people are night owls and it feels more natural for them to stay up later at night. That just means their circadian rhythm could be a slightly different way than, let's say, someone who prefers to go to bed earlier at night and wake up early in the morning. It's just, people, like, as I said, like, you have these circadian rhythms, and, we say roughly, your drop is between like 3 and 5 in the middle of the night and between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. So, that after dinner dip, a lot of people, it's like, they can feel more tired. Their performance can kind of decrease a bit. And then we have our peaks. So our peaks can be between 10 and 12 in the morning, and again in the afternoon after our dip. But again, it'll be slightly different. So some people's are pushed on a bit and they may prefer to, get up earlier, whereas other people's, could be slightly different, could be back a bit, and they may prefer to go to bed earlier. So that's the thing about finding the routine that works for you. But that's the thing that's really important, is it's the routine, is that you get into that works for you, that naturally works for your cycle. So if someone said to me, I go to bed at 12 and I get up at 8 and it works great for me, and I'm like, brilliant. But someone else could say, well, I go to bed at 9 and I get up at, that's 8 hours after 9.
5, I think.
5, whatever it is. Oh God, I'm going to cut that bit out. And that's what works for them. Like, so it's that we want to make sure we're getting sufficient hours in a schedule that works for you individually. But naturally, when we give out numbers, we're saying what the average is. And usually, we want people aiming for bed between 10 and 11 and getting 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep is the aim. But yeah, it's not this perfect, golden ticket is the answer. It's, tweaking either side and having it consistent. And one of the things that I sometimes suggest to people is have 2 alarms, one for the morning and one for the night. And then you keep on your schedule. So it's not like, I'm going to be up another half an hour tonight because your alarm goes off. Like, it's like the morning, your alarm goes off, you get up, your alarm goes off, you go to bed. So it's just to help keep that routine in place, even on the weekends.
I often feel like the snooze button should be illegal.
Now that's why you have to put your phone like on a shelf away from the bed, so you have to get up.
Just touching there on alarms, have you done much research into, I don't actually know what they're called, but it's basically like an orb that gets brighter and brighter as you approach your like wake up time, and it's meant to kind of, I suppose, mimic your circadian rhythm, whereas the day is getting brighter, that you'll naturally wake up. Is there much logic to it, or is it kind of just a gimmick?
It's not something that I've done a lot in or really looked at, but I can understand the reasoning. I assume it's to mimic like a sunrise and to gradually help you in awakening. And I assume it's linked to your sleep in some way in terms of, coming to the end of a stage of sleep. I could be wrong on that. And I can't see its reasons yet. It leads you to a gradual awakening and gradually get up. But at the same time, you need to get the right stage when you're waking up. It'd be great having that. But if you're in the middle of stage 3 sleep, you're still going to wake up groggy and confused. So there is benefits to it. It might help in a more enjoyable awakening rather than the so yeah, but I'm not overly familiar with it.
Yeah, I think there's an element of fear to it. No matter like how loud it is, I can just see myself still fast asleep in a blindingly bright room, just with not a care in the world.
That's it. I my brother gifted me one a few years ago, and I used it for maybe 2 months. But yeah, if I was tired, I was still tired getting up, and there was just this ridiculously bright light staring at me. But I suppose on that, with sleep aids, and I suppose sleep hygiene is something that I would constantly come across on social media, especially. I suppose from your perspective, what does sleep hygiene actually look like? Because like everything on social media, it there's nobody there fact checking, and you have to go so it can be someone's interpretation what they think sleep hygiene is. But then from just expanding on that, then what are good kind of things to have in place for helping you to get into your proper sleep? Obviously having your routine is one part of it, but if you're lying there, so if we take this week for example, houses are much warmer. There's a lot of heat coming in from outside. Are there steps you can kind of put in play? Obviously, this is a selfish question from me because I'm roasted with the last 3 nights. But are there things that you can steps you can kind of follow there that help with your routine and to help you kind of keep that routine going with getting sleep?
Yeah, and it's there are certain things that you can do, and they're not difficult things to do. There's such little tweaks that you can put into your life that can help improve. Like the first thing is have a dark bedroom. Like have it dark. Eliminate the light. Like if, I would encourage blackout blinds if you can get them, but if you can't get blackout blinds, have something in place that's blocking out the light coming in. You want it completely dark. You don't want any light to interfere with your sleep. Another thing is, in our lifetime, we spend 10,000 hours in bed. So my biggest advice is invest in a good bed. You are going to spend a third of your life in it. Get a nice bed. It's the money worth spending. And we're in the middle of coming out of a pandemic. Everyone has a bit of cash probably from all the nights that we didn't go out on. So use that money. Buy nice pillows. Buy nice bed sheets. Buy a nice bed. You're going to spend so much time in it. Have it comfortable to how you like it. If you like a soft bed, get soft bed. If you like it hard, get what works for you. Another thing on the light, some people, because we were just talking about alarm clocks, some people will have alarm clocks next to their bed and, it can be quite bright light across them. Either block it or, get something to cover it up. It's going to interfere with you if it's this, pitch black room and then you have this, usually in red time glaring in your eyes. You don't need to have that. So either face it away or cover it or put it on the dark mode, however you can do it. In terms of temperature, ideally you want to keep your room between 18 to 22 degrees. And however you may need to do that, if you use a fan, if you keep the window open, if you can do that or whatever works for you. 23 or higher just interferes with your sleep. And anything less than 12 is far too cold. So, that's identified as the window that we want to keep it at. So, if your room is getting too hot, put measures in place, even create a draft, open your door and your window and, create a draft through. That's going to help keep that temperature down. And then, of course, there's, different things that we can put in place, the phones are the biggest thing. And I think that's what you always think about when you kind of think of sleep. Everyone gets into bed at night and picks up their phone. And of course, it's blue light coming from your phone. And blue light really interferes with our melatonin release. But we know we need our melatonin to help us prepare for sleep. But it's getting blocked when we're looking at our phones. Now, I know there's ideally by the rule of thumb, it says don't use a phone, or it suggests that you don't use a phone an hour before bed. I don't know how realistic that is. It's probably not that realistic for people. But if you are using it, put it down as dark as possible. And, even in the night, like make sure that if your phone's off, like face it down, have it, if you do use your phone as your clock, make sure it's on absolute darkest as possible. Because if you wake up and check the time, you're looking at this bright light, it wakes you up. And then again, we said you start back in stage 1 of sleep again, but you're after interfering with your pattern. So you want to avoid against doing that. Keep it on silent, which I'm sure, where I assume a lot of people do at the minute anyway. But yeah, keep the room really darkly lit. And another thing is, let's say you come in at night, you've gone training, you've had your dinner, and you went to your bedroom. Don't turn on the main light in your bedroom. Have a small bedside lamp and keep it really dim. Because the worst thing, and so many people do this, they come in the evenings and they turn on all the lights in the house and it's lit up like a fairy cake. And it's actually having a negative impact because we want everything to be dark and dim. So if you do come in, like just turn on a small lamp, keep the room darkly lit, because it's going to help with all that progression into sleep, which is what we want to do. We want to get everything in order to help them when we do get into bed, that we do get to sleep. And, using the phone in bed, like, is there little things you can do to prevent against it? Even turning off your phone and putting it on a press that's the far side of your room, or, the end of your bed. So try and keep your bed for sleeping. And then it'll become that, an easy routine for you, particularly, if you do have difficulty falling asleep or getting asleep. Starting to put those routines in place will kind of help that become your body recognize that, okay, well, this is where I sleep. This is, when I go to sleep, these are the things that I've kind of put in place, prepared for it.
And is it the same for, say, people maybe who don't lean for the phone, but might be sending emails late at night, watching TV, Netflix or whatever it is? Like that's, I suppose, the other side of it that I see from some people going, no, I don't really use my phone, late at night, but they're glued to a series or something, and they fall asleep watching that. Is that, something to try and be wary of too?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you are on your computer late at night or, watching shows on your phone, like, consider adding a blue blocker. There's lots of different apps out there, and, putting on your phone, keep it dim. There's different screens you can get in front of, for your laptops if you're someone who works late at night. Like, put things in place that are going to block it. Like, even just those small little changes, which are really basic and simple, will have an impact. Because, if we're falling asleep with this bright blue light coming into our faces, you're not going to have as good quality sleep. And, we want not just quantity, but we want quality sleep. So it's just like those little small things, like, they're very simple things to do that can have a big impact. It's just getting people to commit. We know lots of things are good for us, in terms of, taking in fluids or, getting exercise. We know these things, we just need to do them.
And that's all largely around stuff like that we can do. Caffeine and alcohol is stuff that we should be avoiding, because some people say, I struggle to sleep, I'll have a beer, it'll relax me a bit. Is that impacting the stage or the phases of sleep you go into then afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we're consuming alcohol before bed, it actually increases our heart rate, whereas when we sleep, we want our heart rate to be decreased. You're not having as good quality sleep. And the same thing now with caffeine. Caffeine can be in the body for up to 7 or 8 hours. So, it's advised that you don't take in any caffeine after 2 p.m. So, sometimes you're about to see people ordering a coffee at 6 or 7 in the evening, and you're just thinking, what are you doing? What are you going to do now? Like, you really want to keep it, like, ideally no later than 2. Like, you should have 2 p.m. And that's not just caffeine. Like, that's your energy drinks. That's, anything that's going to stimulate you like that. Any fizzy drinks, keep them all before 2 o'clock in the day. And actually, there was a study done, and they did find it was 6 hours. They allowed their participants consume caffeine 6 hours before sleep, and they found that it didn't actually interfere with them falling asleep. They were still able to fall asleep fine, but their quality of their sleep was really down. It was, there was a big decline in it. So you think, oh no, I'm fine. I can have this coffee at 6 o'clock and I can still fall asleep at 10 o'clock. But actually your quality of sleep may not be as good, because if it's a stimulant going through your body and we need rest and recovery and sleep, the two don't match. They don't go with each other. So, if you are in that routine, like, try and pull your coffee to earlier, keep it earlier in the day.
something I notice a bit with athletes going training. They would say they're training at 7:30, they throw back a can of Monster or a pre-workout or a caffeine tab beforehand. If it's a big game, like, championship match Friday night, I've no issue. Just be prepared. Suck it up. Like, you're going to have bad sleep afterwards. But if you're doing that for 2 training sessions a week, you really need to look at getting other stuff in place, because you're just not getting, like, you'll get through a training session, but the benefits, the recovery from it, the adaptations, you're not getting any of those at all. And I'd say Damien O'Sullivan down there is a bit of a fiend for it.
Oh yeah, evening games. That caffeine is used, and I unashamedly use it for performance. But where I see it being a huge issue is people take that from a performance perspective and go, well, I'll use it for training as well. And I'm like, no, stop, please.
Absolutely. Like, it's, and it's often just a routine that they've got into, that, and you don't need to do that. You're actually having worse effect. You're going to have a worse effect on your performance because you're not going to have appropriate recovery because you've done that, so people get so consumed, or athletes can get so consumed with the training they're doing in the gym or on the pitch, that they kind of forget about everything else. But it all feeds in. It all is interrelated with each other.
It's interesting when you mentioned the almost boastful attitude that, or kind of perspective that people have on, like, I survive off X amount of sleep, and it's always a shorter. It seems to get a lot more attention. But I'll come across clients, friends, dog on the street, and they'll be like, oh, caffeine has no effect on me. I'm able to have a cup of coffee and go to sleep. And I do get a lot of resistance from people, and I'm like, well, this is actually what caffeine is. This is what it does in your body. But say we're talking, 6 to 8 hours there, or 7 to 8 hours of a window there between when you've consumed last and when you're heading to sleep. What the impact of having something like a cup of coffee right before bed, like, that has to pretty much ruin that entire night's sleep. I would feel, not necessarily ruin's probably the wrong word, but have a serious negative impact. So I suppose, would you have any tips on guiding people around that? And just
don't do it. Don't have a cup of coffee before bed. Look, the best time to take coffee is between 10 and 12 in the day. It's when the body most needs it, most utilizes it. So try and keep it with and you say, those energy drinks and the fizzy drinks. As you said, I completely understand, like, you have the big match or the big performance that you need to go out and perform, you're going to do what has to be done. And, you take the hit on your sleep that night. That is completely understandable because, we're doing all this training and work to ultimately perform. So we want to make sure that we're performing. But if you are presently doing that, just wean back on it, come off it. Why is it that you need to be doing it in training? You don't, because it's having that negative impact in your training. So come back off it. Even, if you want to do it slowly, like, let's say you're training 4 nights a week now, do it 3 nights a week, then progression, then, bring it back, do it 2 nights a week, bring it back, do it 1 night a week. You don't have to go from 4 to 0 if that's going to be quite difficult for you. So, gradually do it, but really, you don't need to be taking it on your training sessions. Know that it's keep it for the big games, because it's going to have all these knock-on effects. And ideally, like, 7 hours before bed, if you know what your bedtime is 11 o'clock, you don't want to be consuming coffee 7 hours before that. Or sorry, consuming all your coffee 7 hours before that 7 hour window.
I was going to say fitness trackers, I think, have actually helped with that, because I know a lot of people, or not a lot of athletes I work with, they'll come in to me the next day and they'll be like, I had 4 or 5 beers last night and my recovery score is only like 2%. And you'll kind of be in your head, you're like, well, you 100% knew this beforehand, that, like, it affects you, but putting, like, a quantifiable number on it seems to just make it click in their head.
It's absolutely amazing. And that is, these are things that we know, but yeah, the second that you can have some objective measure there, you're like, suddenly you're accountable for it.
He wasn't lying.
I suppose with that, I suppose with athletes, they have access to coaches who might have this information to pass on. That's great. But say with the lay public, are there some health impacts that we know of, that consistent, practice around late night, say caffeine consumption affecting our sleep, not necessarily caffeine consumption, but just getting that poor quality and poor quantity of sleep over a number of months, number of years? Do we know of many connections to things like, say, high blood pressure, heart disease, development of chronic diseases, really? Or is there much of a known link?
Yeah, I mean, it links with everything. Like if you are having chronic sleep loss, so, if you miss an hour of sleep a night, okay, not ideal, but you can catch up. But if you are consistently getting, let's say, for example, 6 hours sleep a night, it is not long. Like within 7 days, you're going to already start seeing effects of the consequences of that. Like in terms of, how you physically look, your mental health will decrease, your cognitive function decrease, your ability to make decisions, your reactions, and your mood, which is a huge, will influence and impact your whole well-being. But also there's physical changes that are occurring in your body as well. You've increased, it's been linked, I think, with diabetes as well, and a whole host of other physiological ailments. You can't get away from it. And if you continue to do it long time, like it's a form of abuse on your body, because if you think about it, we physiologically need it. And if you continue not to do that, it does catch up with you. And, as I was saying before, it's linked getting insufficient sleep in your younger life, so your 20s and 30s, is now, there's new research going that it's actually strongly linked with the dementia and Alzheimer's. And other physiological ailments as well. It decreases your physical health, it decreases your cognitive health, it decreases your well-being. You're also not as an enjoyable person to be around, because you're the biggest thing that we notice in people is like they're in a bad mood or they're in poor form, and of course that can spiral. You can get into a negative mood, people don't want to be around you, you get into a very pessimistic way of thinking. It all, then you go, okay, your eating may get more poor because you're not bothered, because you feel too tired to get up and do anything. You don't want to exercise because you feel you don't have the energy. You're gaining weight, you're not getting all the associated benefits, so it just spirals. Sleep is such a core of it all, that without it we really, it triggers down into all different aspects of our health, and you cannot get around it. We cannot cheat it. People thinking they can get by in less hours sleep, it'll catch up in the end. Even if you think you're doing it now, it catches you in the end. So, it's better recognizing what your body needs, putting those things in place now. And, I'm not saying like go off and you have to be in bed every night at 10 o'clock and up at 6, because life still happens as well. There's different things on, the reality of life is there, but just different small changes that you can put, like having that consistent routine, having a good sleep environment, keeping it dark, having a comfortable, enjoyable, environment within your room, keeping your lights dim, keeping the bright light on your phone or exposure to blue light down. They all will influence, like they're little tiny changes that we make now that have huge benefits for us across the board that we might not even know about.
It's actually, just when you mentioned, even after like 7 days or something like that, I remember and this is very unscientific of me because I can't remember the exact study or authors, but there was a paper came out of Pennsylvania, and it was people were limited to 4.5 hours, 4.5 hours sleep per night, and that there was a serious increase in feelings of irritability, more vulnerable, a higher vulnerability to stress, quicker to anger, more vulnerable to feelings of sadness, and just pretty like negative outcomes. But when the same people were returned to their normal sleeping patterns, that all of these things improved, even like, and those two sides of, even from a nutrition perspective, from a diet perspective, you had people who overconsumed, but also people who underconsumed as well, just in reaction to, I suppose, an increased stress on the body, I guess.
Absolutely. And like stress is a huge thing, like physical stress on the body because it's not appropriately recovering, but also that mental stress. And it's such a trigger for everything else, like anxiety, depression, in terms of the mental side of things. Then I haven't got the energy, I'm not bothered doing all these, like, eating right, it's, engaging in physical activity. They all trigger each other off. And, it can very quickly end up in a negative spiral. And, it might only be when people aren't getting enough sleep, then they experience that, then they actually recognize, hang on a second, I do need this, I'm not superhuman, what, this is very important. And even another thing it's strongly linked with is our immune function. So there was actually research done, and they found that people who sleep less than 6 hours a night had a 4-fold increase of following exposure to a virus that they would get sick, like for example the common cold. 4-fold increase just by not getting sufficient sleep. And that's relative to people who traditionally sleep 7 hours a night. So that 1 extra hour a night, the increase in exposure that can put you to, and also other research done found that people who sleep less than 5 hours a night, if they were exposed to a virus, that they had a 48% chance of getting sick versus someone who naturally sleeps 7 to 8 hours a night, they had a 17% chance of getting sick. So, again, it's just another way that it catches you. Your chances of insufficient sleep, your chances of pneumonia increase, your chances of the common cold increase, respiratory issues, they're all really closely linked with how much sleep you're getting. So, and particularly in these times with COVID, you want to be careful because there's so many factors that could influence it. You want to have yourself in as healthy a position as possible, if, God forbid, you do get COVID.
That's that's useful that we've see, like, you don't have to just think, oh, it's long-term impacts, I can get on top of it. There are very significant short-term impacts there too to be aware of. Actually, and one thing, I'm kind of jumping back there, I should have probably gone from liquid or like caffeine kind of intake to food, but timing of meals late at night, especially, and if I keep in mind that we all work with athletes and we've a lot of athletic populations, coaches, athletes themselves listening, and that late night eating and its impact on sleep. What are some of the key things there that we should be aware of? There's a lot of opinion around it. You shouldn't eat within 4 hours of sleep. I'll come across that, and which is obviously almost impossible if you're an athlete. There's no two ways around it because you need to get that side of your recovery going as well. What are some of the things there that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so that will be influenced a lot by, how you're training, what else is going on and how you can fit it in. But, the big main thing, the one thing that you want to avoid is do not eat a big dinner right before you go to sleep in any way if you can avoid that, because your body's trying to digest it. It's going to massively interfere with your sleep. You can't do that. Your body, it's going to ruin your sleep because your body's so busy trying to digest the food. So that's the big main thing that you want to avoid doing. So look at your schedule. So if you've certain times that, if you're training later and then if you're going to have meetings and you want to get home, like, can you do anything around that? Like, if you really look at your schedule, can you, eat it? I know you're going to have to eat a certain, depending on what food you're trying to take in, you're going to have to eat at a certain time after training. But can you alter what you're eating on those particular days that you can't distance the amount of time from when you're going to sleep? Or, it's funny because there's so many different schedules that, some people can eat before it, some people can't. But the big main thing is, we don't want to be eating large meals. Or even there's also been some research said that particularly spicy meals just before going to bed, because they can have these stimulating effects as well. And that they can influence and impact sleep. But that's the main thing that you want to avoid. Now, the research in the area is coming on more and more, and it's not a huge area of mine. But really, that would be the key information that I would say. So look at your schedule. So oftentimes athletes think, oh, I can't fit different things in, or this is just the way it is. But actually, if they just tweak a few things, they can manage it. But it might take a half an hour sitting down and looking at your schedules, looking at your timelines, looking at your routines, and seeing how you can fit all those things in, because it is absolutely doable and doing what's best and what actually works for you.
Anything else to go with, lads? Or I've one last question actually, just around. You mentioned earlier about when you're falling asleep and some people twitch. What's happening there?
It's as your body is going into relaxation mode. It's slowly like your muscles are relaxing, your brain activity is relaxing, your muscles might twitch up, and it's just like a little jump. Oftentimes people feel like they're falling.
That's the report. Yeah.
So it's like your natural progression into sleep. I actually love that though, because it kind of makes you think you're going to sleep, and nice feeling. Having another 8 hours in bed now. This is brilliant. And actually, sorry, just one last thing on it that a lot of people forget is, I'm here talking about, right, you want to make sure that you get 8 hours good quality sleep, so quality and quantity sleep. But people sometimes forget that I'm talking about 8 hours sleep. So you may have to leave yourself a 9 hour window to get 8 hours sleep. So, I was talking about 11 to 7. That means if you want to be asleep by 11, you want to be in bed by 10:30. So if you're setting those alarms for getting up and going to bed, people might go, well, I've been in bed 8 hours. That's great. But you haven't been asleep 8 hours. You've actually only been asleep, 7 hours, 15 minutes because you spent 45 minutes on your phone, but you're letting yourself think, oh, I have 8 hours sleep. So, that's the biggest thing. Leave yourself enough time that you can get into bed, get comfortable, relax, and then naturally fall into a sleep rather than just think it's like go, one from the other.
And I suppose my only other question then with that would be, again, it kind of goes back to intake, but water, for example, like having to wake up in the middle of the night to run to the bathroom, that's something, again, I suppose it's something that everyone can kind of run into that issue, but athletes especially will run into that issue because you're trying to consume more liquid to deal with your sweat ratio and all that. Is there any kind of, I suppose, rough guideline we should be looking at there where we should kind of go after this point, maybe leave off liquid or anything like that?
I never say after a point leave off liquid, but yeah, absolutely, like watch your fluid intake because we don't want you to have to get up, turn on a bright light. And that's another thing. If you're going to get up and turn on a bright light, have a lamp somewhere that, you're not exposing yourself to this mad bright light to go to the bathroom and come back in. So and that may take a bit of tweaking to get that right. But look, some people will just have to get up anyway and go to the bathroom. If you do, you do. That's fine. But can you tweak things? Like, can you consume more higher amounts of fluids and then gradually decrease it down so that it isn't impacting your sleep and then take more the next day? Or is that impacting your performance? So tweak it around. But ideally, don't, if you're somebody who gets up and has to go to the bathroom, don't drink a litre or don't of water before you go to bed, because that's going to happen to you. So just try and tweak your schedule so that you can avoid that, but also make sure that you're taking in sufficient fluids. And if you can take fluids the next morning, that's still going to not have a negative impact, well, then maybe consider doing that because, we really don't want that sleep disturbed. We really want that window that it's quality and quantity sleep that with no disturbances. But there's so many things to juggle as an athlete, isn't there? Between your timing of your training, your nutrition, your hydration. It's a great kind of, I don't know, Tetris game to get it all right.
Everyone is their own little experiment. It's fascinating.
And it's not going to, what works for me won't work for you, won't work for someone else. The more that you tweak it and get those routines in place, like you will become a lot more aware of your body and what's working for it and maybe things that aren't working for it. And unfortunately, no apps, even with their objective numbers, are going to give us the answer to that. So it really just takes time to kind of, recognize what's going on with yourself.
That's been absolutely brilliant. Donnla, do you want to hop in with that else, Shane, before we wrap up?
No, that's been brilliant.
No, thanks a million. You're back in DCU lecturing September and hopefully getting over to finish off that postdoc at some stage.
Well, hopefully we'll see. We'll see what we get there. It'd be brilliant if it could, but I don't know what way labs are going to go for a while. I mean, anywhere. So you're afraid to start any research in case it gets shut down. You'd hate to spend a pile of money on research and then everything gets shut down again and you're in trouble.
Otherwise, you'll just be selling that scent to Lynx or like
Christmas scent.
Lovely. Thanks a million for that, Donnla.
No bother at all.